The National Bureau of Statistics has stated that more than 700 billion naira was paid in cash as bribes by citizens to public officials in 2023. In its report titled NBS Corruption in Nigeria, Patterns and Trends, the Bureau said 70% of Nigerians declined to pay bribes at least once in 2023. Released in Abuja on Thursday, the report said about 76% of those who rejected bribes are mostly in the Northwest. That's the highest across the geopolitical zones. The inflation-adjusted average cash bribe in 2023 was actually 29% smaller than in 2019 in terms of what could be bought with the money. The NBS report indicated that 52% of all bribes paid to public officials were demanded by them, adding that indirect bribes collected accounted for 23%. The data, the Bureau said, over 95% of all bribes paid in 2023 were paid in form of cash or money transfer. On corruption, the report said it ranked fourth, which is about 10.9% of the notable issues that affected the country in 2023. This suggests relatively stable and high levels of concerns about corruption over time and compared to other concerns such as education or housing. And we'll now move on to our guest, which we have in the studio at the moment now to help us examine the NBS report on corruption is the Executive Director of the Center for Credible Leadership and Citizens Awareness, Dr. Gabriel Nwambu. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening, and thanks for having me.
Dr. Nwambu is also the convener of the Global Center for Conscious Living Against Corruption. And also joining us is a data analyst with the National Bureau of Statistics, Shamsudeen Lawal. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening, listeners.
All right. To have me here. So good to have you here. So, Doctor, what do you make of the NBS statistics? I mean, 700 billion naira being used as bribes.
Well, thank you so much. You see, these findings by the NBS, in collaboration with the United Nations Office of on Drugs and Crimes, it comes every 4 years. And this is coming 721 billion, perpetrated by public office holder. These are persons who are paid the highest paid in the country. These are the same people that are debating on how to pay a living wage to the Nigerian worker. You see, what is happening is that I see a huge disconnect between the populace themselves and the elites. Who are the public office holders? These are the office of the president, the vice president, and all the appointees, ministerial appointees. You come to the National Assembly, both chambers. You go to the state, you talk about the governor and the deputy governor. You go down to local government.
Including civil servants.
Including, that. Yeah. Now, what kind of even civil servant do we have? We found out in this report was able to unravel that 6 out of every 10 persons that was recruited either paid bribe, or issued money, or was employed out of nepotism, or both. What kind of civil service do we expect to have in a country like this? And this is a country that is also hemorrhaging, that is going in the street of China looking for where to get money to fund its own budget. It's rather unfortunate, very unfortunate.
All right, Shamsudeen, talk to us about how the NBS got to this conclusion. What were the metrics used in actually getting your data?
Okay, thank you very much. And I think the doctor mentioned it that this is the third round we are releasing this survey. The first survey was conducted 2016, while the second survey was conducted 2019, and this last one was conducted last year. And the reference period for the survey, by reference period here I mean the reference period of data collection. So we actually, it's a household-based survey, not administrative-based data. We randomly selected households across state of the country within 60 enumeration areas, EAs, and in each EE is 15 households. And in each household, we randomly selected an adult to ask them about their experiences on corruption and bribery in contact with public officials.
And so that's how you arrived at all.
So this is like the methodology of the data collection. Then going back to the questionnaire, we asked them some basic questions that has to do with their demographics. Then we asked them question on 18 public officials, whether they had contact with them, because contact rate is the denominator for bribery. Because without contact with public officials, there won't be bribery or corruption. So we asked them if they had contact with public officials from November 2022 to the time of survey, which is October 2023. So once we asked about 18 public officials, police, doctors, teachers, all public set of public officials, whether they had contact, because that's the denominator of computing the prevalence. So once they say they had contact with the public officials, we'll ask them whether they asked them to pay bribe, or not, and if they ask them to pay bribe, whether they decline.
All right, so how did you arrive at the 721 billion naira being the quantum?
Okay, before going to that, I want to mention that the contact rate had reduced from 63% in 2019 to 56% in this current, in this recent release. Recent release reduced to 56%. And this is due to e-governance and other contactless services.
Yeah, where you don't have to look at someone or see someone or meet someone physically.
Yes, so listeners need to understand the contact rate before we go to the prevalence. The prevalence rate was computed, or is computed by SDG indicator 16.5.1, which says that prevalence rate is percentage of adults. Thus, by adult in the questionnaire, we mean 18 and above, that had contact with public officials. They were asked to pay bribe, they paid the bribe, or they were asked to pay bribe, but they refused. That's the numerator of the computation. While the denominator is among those that had contact.
All right, so the question actually is, how did you now get to 721 billion naira?
Yes, we have to understand the contact rate, then the prevalence.
So much time, so that...
okay, how we arrive at 721 billion naira. There is one indicator we call average number of bribe paid by bribe payer in the last 12 months was computed to be 5.1, average bribe paid. Then average amount, because as I said on the questionnaire, we have different public officials. Average amount paid to public officials was computed to be 8,284 naira. Okay. And also in the questionnaire, we asked frequency of the payment. How many times within the last 12 months they pay a bribe? So from our data, we analyzed that 87 million bribes were paid. So if you multiply 87 million bribes times the average amount, which is 8,284, you arrive at 721 billion.
All right, very important indeed. All right, so doctor, let's talk about preventive measures. I mean, how could we have had EFCC and ICPC since 2003, and yet we're still struggling? Nigerians, despite not having so much disposable income, are still bribing public officials for what those public officials should do for them freely.
Thank you so much. It's also imperative that we also recall that 51% of persons that were analyzed here, that is 51% of recruits into the government jobs, into government public service, 51% were not even assessed. In other words, they paid the bribe and probably were not even interviewed, and nobody saw them. And they got the job.
Interesting.
You see, it becomes ironical. You see, that is what we are saying is a country that is bedeviled with corruption. People are striving by all means to see whether they can survive. And that is what essentially is pushing them to pay this bribe. But however, the entire system is so locked up with corruption in a manner that it becomes almost impossible to survive in an economy like this without corruption. So what are we looking at? We are looking at, we have to re-engineer. We have to restart, the orientation and reorientation of our people.
But if you don't pay bribes, those things are not done. So how? Because the citizens are in need, And yet, those public officials force them to actually pay those bribes, because if they don't pay, they won't get those services. They won't get
those jobs. You see, what is happening is that we must look for a way. The EFCC is there, the ICPC is there. We have new heads, and relatively there, we cannot assess them. Really, it's too early to say whether they are doing very well or not. But more is expected of them. We expect them to ensure that public servants, who are found wanting, are brought to book. Proper investigations have to be done, and Nigerians need to see them face the wrath of the law.
All right. Look
at Abia State, where the people have accused, there is an alleged corruption case for somebody who is a senator now, a former governor, 7.6 billion naira. For 17 years, we are still talking about that. The man has not, he's still there enjoying himself. At the Senate,
these issues are
elections are coming. Edo State governorship election is coming, and we are going to also see how INEC, the electoral management body, is going to, dispense and discharge its function as an electoral management body. Not just INEC, the security agencies, because without a conducive environment, they cannot even be a free and fair election.
All right. So what exactly are the recommendations that you are giving to government in this report?
So actually,
very quickly, as we try to run off the conversation.
Actually, the role of NBS is to make sure we gather quality data for data users. That is for EFCC, ICPC, Ministry of Justice, for them to plan well so that they can fight corruption. But in terms of the data, what we can advise or what we can recommend is for government to invest more on e-governance, so that contactless public services will be rendered without any contact with the public officials by citizens.
All right, just in 30 seconds before I let you go, how can we ensure that we create systems that do not bring people directly in contact like the NBS has recommended?
Yeah, the e-payments, but the e-payments we have in Nigeria has been compromised. Otherwise, how do you find directors in INEC, in CBN, cutting away very large, huge sums of money, just an individual? It becomes terrible. What I'm saying is that the systems we have in place now are already compromised. And that is why it is possible for individuals to take away money and go scot-free. So we need to go get new systems that are antidote, that are, a sort of panacea to corruption. For now, the system is corrupt, and all the e-system payment we have is not working.
All right, Dr. Gabriel Nwambu is the executive director of centers. What's the other name again? I mean, the anti-corruption one you talked about.
Global Center for Conscious.
Yeah. I mean, that's the one that I really like, because I mean, it helps create awareness about curbing corruption and all of that. And then Shamsudeen Lawal is also a data analyst with the National Bureau of Statistics. We must thank you so much. But one good thing that I think that we need to do is to know that corruption actually kills the nation. Because if we continue to bribe officials with the monies that are supposed to be used to do other things, and of course we'll continue to face challenges in governance. And let's just hope that we do not have a situation whereby one person will penetrate the system and steal 109 billion naira like the former accountant general was alleged to have done. How could these systems be penetrated without an alarm being raised? Well, that's the much we can take on this edition of This Week.